Fantasy versus Finale.
Now, up to the left side of the map, towards the bottom a little bit. SKT1 player coached by Boxer. He is
SK Telecom T1 Fantasy.
quite famous. You can actually hear the crowd rallying for him here.
Boxer saying that Fantasy is playing so well these days and he's really impressed by his players. So let's see if Fantasy can live up to the expectations of his coach. To the right side we have his Protoss opponent. Starting in blue for Team MVP we have
MVP Finale.
That's a shot of him. It was Fantasy in his booth was using a QSEN DT35. Actually went to a PC bomb today. From the outside it was called like, it had a terrible name. Like I saw it and I was walking around. I had a lot of extra time today and I was like, well, I guess I'll try it. It's the only PC bomb around. Best PC bomb I've ever been to. Had DT35s in there. I've never seen PC bomb with DT35s. I just want to tell you guys about it. There's one in Mokdong. If you're looking for a PC bomb that has DT35s, look for the PC bomb with a bad name that doesn't look like it's going to be good or even have games in it. It looks like something you would go to like write office documents, but it's a good one.
The funny thing about those two meeting in the up and downs is that they played in the GSL in Code A. It was Fantasy who took the best of 3. It was in the preliminaries actually, not Code A, sorry my bad. And they played a best of 3 there, and they did not play on this map in particular, but it was actually Keep Calm and Drone. Yeah, well, yeah, not really, doesn't really fit for this game.
I would have loved to see that one last game. I'm pretty sure he made it for that, but
yeah, I mean, the one thing that he definitely did is drone up.
Yeah.
Going up to like 106 drones, that was quite something. But coming back to my point, Fantasy and Finale, they already played in the preliminaries, and Fantasy took the game with the 2-1. So, actually I have it, okay, the data that I have here is a little bit weird. First of all, it says it's Code A and then it jumps to preliminaries. It was a Code A game, was the best of 3. In the end, Fantasy took the best of 3 back then with 2-1, and now it's up to Finale to change things to get a bit of revenge for what happened back then.
Yeah, he wants to get that revenge for certain. I wonder what build we're going to see from Finale, because this is what he is known for. He and Tails, 2 MVP Protosses. You know, some people say that there are 2 sides to a coin, heads and tails, but in this case it's pretty much Finale and Tails. They're actually such similar players with slight variations in their playstyles, but they're both so good at preparation they could almost be brothers. And I wonder what we're going to see from Finale. Is he just going to play the late game? Because when he does, sometimes he actually makes a lot of macro mistakes, and sometimes he has weird decisions that he makes in the late game that don't make sense, because normally he doesn't play to the late game when he's in a tournament setting. He actually goes for certain timing attacks, oftentimes cheeses, very weird tricky play like a hidden expansion. That's the kind of style that we see, but so far he's playing very straight up, just gets a sentry out with the Nexus of old school 1 gateway, 1 gas expand.
I really want to see how the fights turn out. Fantasy really impressed me a lot with the micro that we saw in all the StarCraft 2 games for him so far. And if he shines in the battles himself, then finally might find him in a very weird position here. With the builds, I am completely with you. I feel that he is really one who prepares a lot of specific strategies for an opponent. He's one of those preparation players that we talked about, which gives him, of course, maybe a bit of an edge in a situation like this in the up and downs, where you know the map in advance, you know the players in advance that you face on the map, so you can prepare very well. You can read up on the players, you can watch all those VODs and replays that are available. But Fantasy is a strong opponent, and especially in the fights themselves, all the preparation won't help Finale at all. That's where Micro is going to decide the battles, and of course unit positioning.
Speaking of Micro, Finale is going to have to Micro pretty well against these Marines coming. Fantasy might turn around when he sees this many units. He only has 5 Marines. And I think as long as Finale doesn't totally botch his Micro, that would have been a terrible engagement for Fantasy to take. But Finale has no scouting information. The only thing he saw was those Marines that were at the top of the ramp, which weren't even all of Fantasy's Marines. He doesn't know about CC first, which is probably why he did this type of opening where he didn't cut anything to get a faster Nexus. This very annoying SCV scout, though, spots Finale's Nexus.
The SCV is down. And Fantasy, if you just look at his games in general, his best matchup right now is the matchup against Terran. The matchup against Protoss is actually his weakest one, but once again, with him just transitioning over to StarCraft 2 recently, we don't have too many games that he played in televised matches. We have 13 wins and 9 losses. Gives you a little bit of a trend, a bit of an idea of how good he is in the matchup, but it's not really yeah, safe to say that this is definitely this is his weakest one. We just don't have enough data for him.
Yeah.
Halfway done now with the Stim. Finale, on the other hand, going into the Twilight Council. We have him with a Forge here. Wants to go for the extra upgrade. So far, not a single upgrade for the Protoss player. Both of them being on 2 bases. And looking at the harvester count, we have the slight lead for the Protoss that you would expect.
And he goes into Twilight Council before by Support Bay, Finale does, which is something that we don't see very often anymore. But he's doing the 1 Forge style. He goes for attack upgrades instead of armor upgrades first as well.
Yeah, for Colossi, really important that you go straight for the armor upgrades. If you play with a more gateway heavy style, usually prefer to have the armor upgrades there so that you can tank a little bit more damage. But if you're trying to head into Colossus, then going straight for armor +1, +2, +3 is what we usually see.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is when you think about the Colossus as a unit, it does a lot of splash damage. It's much more valuable for the Colossus to have attack upgrades before armor when the Viking count is low, because the more Vikings there are, the more double shots you have. Each Viking's attack actually takes double shots so that armor is applied twice. But when the Viking count is fairly low and you're doing a timing attack like Finale's about to do with 6 gateways, it actually makes more sense to have the +1 attack. But he's actually taking the 3rd Nexus, or at least making it look like he's going to.
Going for the 3rd Nexus, we have him at 49 harvesters, going up to 51. So far, he doesn't get any additional SCVs. He stopped for a second. Let's see if he continues.
Yeah, we could see that lazy boy push, man.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Finale, on the other hand, is still going for the pro production. So with the 3rd base and him going up to 54 harvesters now, we might just see him go for this 3rd base and trying to protect it. We have Fantasy moving out now with the first few medivacs. A Stalker for Finale is trying to glimpse what's happening here. Charge is just started, +1 not even done. Fantasy's on the move, has a supply lead, and he's out for blood.
Yep, the blink here saves the Stalker. Fantasy is not going for the 30. He wants to go in right now. And Finale, a little bit low on units here. A good force seal, but he needs another one. He loses a sentry right off the bat, and his Colossi are not ready. And his +1 does not finish. It's unpowered. He may lose his Forge.
And here comes the Stim for Fantasy going in. The first Colossus is ready and just able to throw this army back. Fantasy not hesitating, stimming and running up the ramp. He has the medivacs, so even if there are force fields, he can always save his units with the medivacs, just safely bringing him behind the force fields. But already showing his aggression here, and he's going straight into the Vikings now with 4 medivacs. Can drop into the main base, but he didn't even see the 3rd yet, did he?
Yeah, I think he just saw it with his factory, and he has enough to at least pressure it. If he gets a concave at the top of the ramp, he could fight this, but he doesn't have the rocks to escape.
Well, he has the 4 medivacs, that should be enough. If he moves in, takes down the... can pick up and move to the left.
Either
but he
way,
wants to contain Finale here.
Exactly. Finale does not decide to engage. He knows he doesn't have enough support for his Colossus. The second one's about to come out. If he had +1, this might have been a different story. But he has to keep so many units in his main base because, like you said, with 4 medivacs on the map, you never know what Fantasy might do. Double Forge was restarted, so he has 1-1 on the way. Fantasy already with +1, and +1 armor is ahead of Finale's +1.
What we didn't see is extended thermal lance, if I'm not mistaken. So what?
Right.
I mean, with the Twilight count or with the Templar Archive coming up here, it looks a little bit more like he was originally planning to go into 1 Colossus and then at the Templars, but now that he sees Fantasy pressuring him, he goes into a Colossus. Doesn't have the range upgrade, which is definitely a bit of a problem for him, and he didn't start it even though he has the resources, and here comes the Terran player.
There's a gap in the force field as well. He has charge, but he doesn't have enough, and Fantasy is just going to roll him over here like a steamroller.
The Colossus is gone. Here comes Fantasy with another Stim, moving in, takes out the Archive, goes straight into the natural. GG. Fantasy takes the win very convincingly.
Something went wrong for Finale in that game. Obviously losing the Forge was a big problem, but his micro and the way he decided to power up his gateways and make a 3rd Nexus at the same time just didn't add up. Fantasy realized what was happening and punished him. And he like you said, he ran him over like a rolling pin. It was like a thwomp in Super Mario Bros. Totally flattened him.
Was very well played by Fantasy, and no problem for him to take this win. Walks across the map and takes out Finale. The 3rd Nexus, well, went up. He lost it immediately, could never mine from this position. That was really well done by Fantasy. So he gets the first win. He's now tied with Nestia in this first set of matches that we have. And we are going into our 3rd game of the day, Protoss versus Protoss.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the match that a lot of people were waiting for. We have Huck.
Yeah, it's time for Huck, and you know, this is just the first 3 sets of games we've had. So things start here, but it's not going to be the end all. So we've already seen 2 players that are, I would say, pretty big favorites, especially for fans, do well. And now we'll see if the third one can come through. I think that Huck is highly the fan favorite here. Flying is somebody everyone was talking about. He did extremely well. I remember the first time the Castle players ever played televised StarCraft 2, I watched him and said, okay, he's the best. But everything has changed since then. But I think he is going to give Huck some trouble here.
Flying is an opponent who can definitely be a little bit cheesy, who likes to have specific openings, is very aggressive. So we're going to find out how he's doing against Huck. We've seen a lot of proxy gateways yesterday. A lot of very sneaky strategies in the up and downs. You also had a few cannon rushes, so a lot of Protoss players in this matchup decide to be a bit more aggressive than in the past few months. We're going to find out if Flying or Huck have this in mind as well. And of course, when we talk about Protoss versus Protoss and proxy, one of the games that comes to mind is when Naniwa and Huck played, I think it was at MLG,
yeah, I know
on
exactly
Antigua Shipyard. And Entombed Valley is today's map for this mirror match.
Yeah, you know, Huck has been in a lot of situations in PvP where he gets a pylon in his base, or he gets a pylon in someone else's base, or sometimes there's proxies. He's dealt with crazy situations like this before, so if we see one of these new, well, old styles that's coming back to almost be new and remade, I think Huck should be able to deal with that. But honestly, I think Flying is going to do something like Phoenix is on this map. I think he's going to do one of our Neo-Protoss styles.
We had a... This is actually the map where we had a game with Hero, and when Hero played, he was up against a 4-gate War Prison play when he was going on to Phoenixes himself. So Entombed Valley is always, I feel, a little bit weird for Protoss versus Protoss. You can play nearly everything on this map. Yeah. And it just depends on your opponent's abilities to scout you, or if he's just getting the better build order against you. So I'm not quite sure what we're going to see here, but for both of them, of course, it's really important. The reason why the first games, well, you can lose the first game, but for a lot of players, when mindsets come into play, it's really important to get an early win because they need this. This is what we saw with Hero yesterday. When Hero started losing games early on, it was really something that gave him a lot of trouble. Yeah, it affected him emotional, and then he didn't really play his best in all of the games.
He had to play the longest game in GSL history in the first set.
Exactly. He started to come back after this and went up to 2 wins and 3 losses, but because of how the situation in the group worked out, he wasn't tied with anyone, and then just dropped down to Corday, which was of course not what people expected. A lot of people before the match saw him to take the first place. That didn't happen, so for Hero a little bit unfortunate, and exactly the reason why you always want to start off with a win. It gives you a lot of confidence, and you can carry that momentum into Game 3 and
you always,
Game 2.
You always want to make sure that you are in control of your group standing, not somebody else, and that's what happens if you lose too many games early. Towards the end, it's hard to motivate yourself, especially if you're in a situation like Hero was yesterday, where even if he wins, he doesn't know if he can advance. It doesn't even necessarily matter. It's all up to his opponents.
And Huck prepared a lot, and he actually played a lot of, ladder and streamed all the games in the last few days. I think for the last 5 days, every day he had the stream on for several hours. Personally, I thought it was a little bit weird, because usually when you talk to players that prepare for a specific match, they always say, well, I don't want to stream right now. This is what Paul stopped doing after he did it initially, what Naniwa stopped doing, because they all said, my opponents are actually going to watch my stream. And Hack, for example, back then, the StarTale player, he had 2 monitors. He was playing on one monitor, he was having the streams of his opponent on the second one, and every single time his opponent would jump into the same matchup on ladder, he would stop his games and would just watch and analyze the strategies. So I'm not quite sure why Huck streamed all these games. I'm not quite sure if all those players in his group took advantage of this by watching him play, or had someone monitor the games, maybe a coach to give them a glimpse of what Huck might do. He played a lot of gateway attacks. And well, we're gonna find out what's gonna happen. This is a Protoss versus Protoss. We have the Wounding Stars player to the left, Flying, versus Huck here at the GSL up and downs Group E. Let's jump into the game, Wolf. We have a Protoss versus Protoss, and the Foreign Hope, the Canadian player, he's ready for his first game, and so are we.